All stories posted on our channel are stories from our subscribers and created by us based on real events we've experienced and witnessed. We post new stories every day for your entertainment, that we hope you enjoy them. Thank you.
There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from sleeping next to someone who's forgotten you exist. It is not the sharp, clean pain of losing someone to death or distance. It is something slower, more insidious, a gradual erosion of the self that happens so incrementally you do not notice it until you wake up one morning and realize you have become a ghost in your own home. My name is Donovan Cole, and for the past 11 years, I have been married to a woman named Priscilla. We lived, in a 4-bedroom craftsman house in Eugene, Oregon, a home we purchased together 8 years ago, with dreams of filling it with children and laughter and all the beautiful chaos of a life well lived. Those dreams never materialized. The children never came, despite years of trying and thousands of dollars spent on fertility treatments that left us both emotionally and financially. And somewhere along the way, the laughter stopped too, replaced by a silence so profound it seemed to echo off the walls of our beautiful, empty home. I am 41 years old, and I work as a civil engineer for the city. It is steady work, respectable work, the kind of job that allows me to provide a comfortable life for my wife without requiring me to sacrifice every waking hour at the office. I have always believed in balance, in the importance of being present for the people you. But presence, I have learned, means nothing if the person you are present for refuses to see you. The intimacy issues in our marriage did not begin overnight. Like everything else, they crept in gradually, a slow withdrawal that I initially attributed to the stress of our fertility struggles. When Priscilla began turning away from me in bed, I told myself she needed time to heal from the disappointment of another failed treatment. When weeks turned into months, I convinced myself that patience was the answer, that she would come back to me when she was ready. But weeks became months, and months became years, and eventually I stopped reaching for her altogether because the rejection had become too painful. 2 months ago, I decided to make one final effort. I sat Priscilla down at our kitchen table, the same table where we had shared thousands of meals, where we had laughed and argued and planned our future, and I told her how I was feeling. I spoke from the heart, laying bare my loneliness, my frustration, my desperate need to feel connected to the woman I did not accuse or blame. I simply asked her to help me understand what had changed and what we could do to find our way back to each other. Her response was a masterpiece of deflection. She was tired. She was stressed about work. She did not feel attractive anymore. She needed more time. There was always an excuse, always a reason why intimacy was impossible, always a promise that things would get better soon. But soon never came, and I began to realize that it never would. For 2 months, I waited. I waited for her to reach for me in the night, to look at me with something other than indifference, to give me any indication that she still wanted me as her husband. I brought her flowers. I planned romantic dinners. I suggested weekend getaways, couples counseling, anything that might bridge the chasm that had opened between us. Each suggestion was met with the same response. Not now, maybe later, I'm just not in the mood. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in early March. I had come home from work to find Priscilla on the couch, scrolling through her phone with the absent expression that had become her default state. I sat down beside her, placed my hand on her knee, and asked if we could talk. She did not look up from her screen. About what? About us, I said. About our marriage. About the fact that we haven't been intimate in over 2 months, and you don't seem to care. She sighed, the sound heavy with exasperation. Not this again, Donovan. I told you, I've just been tired. Work has been crazy. Can't you just be patient? I have been patient, I replied, struggling to keep my voice calm. I've been patient for years. But patience without progress is just waiting to be disappointed, and I'm tired of being disappointed. She finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in what felt like days. What do you want me to do? Force myself to be intimate with you when I'm not in the mood? Would that make you happy? The question hit me like a slap. No, I said quietly. That's not what I want at all. I want you to want me, Priscilla. I want you to look at me the way you used to, like I was someone worth wanting. I want to feel like your husband, not your roommate. She rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes at me, as if my feelings were an inconvenience she did not have time for. You're being dramatic. Plenty of couples go through dry spell. It doesn't mean anything. 2 months isn't a dry spell, I said. 2 months is a pattern, and it's not just about the physical intimacy. It's about the emotional connection, too. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you asked about my day, or shared something meaningful about yours? When was the last time we laughed together? She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched something shift behind her eyes. Not remorse, not understanding, something harder, more defensive. I don't have the energy for this right now, she said, returning her attention to her phone. We can talk about it later. But we both knew we would not talk about it later. We never talked about it later. The conversation would be forgotten, swept under the rug along with all the other conversations we had avoided, until the next time I gathered enough courage to bring it up again. That night, lying awake in the darkness while Priscilla slept soundly beside me, I made a decision. I could not force her to love me. I could not force her to want me. But I could choose to stop accepting a life that made me feel invisible. I could choose myself for once, even if that choice meant walking away from everything I had built. The next morning, I called a real estate agent. Selling a house without your spouse's knowledge is not an easy thing to do. There are legal complications, ethical considerations, and the ever-present risk of discovery. But in Oregon, I learned, a house that was purchased before the marriage and kept solely in one spouse's name could be sold without the other's consent. Our Craftsman home fell into this category. I had purchased it 6 months before our wedding, using an inheritance from my grandmother, and Priscilla's name had never been added to. It was a technicality, one that I had never thought twice about during the happy years of our. But now, that technicality became my lifeline, a way out of a situation that had become unbearable. The real estate agent's name was Claudia Vance, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. I met her at a coffee shop across town, far from anywhere Priscilla might accidentally see us, and explained my situation in broad strokes. I told her I was going through a difficult time in my marriage and needed to explore my options. I told her I wanted to know what the house was worth and how quickly it could be sold. Claudia listened without judgment, her pen moving across her notepad as she took down details about the property. When I finished, she looked up at me with eyes that had clearly seen this situation before. "I'm not going to ask about the particulars of your marriage," she said. "That's your business. But I will tell you that in my 30 years of doing this job, I've learned that people don't sell their homes on a whim. If you're sitting across from me right now, it's because you've already made a decision. Am I right?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Good," she said briskly. "Then let's talk numbers. Based on the information you've given me and the current market condition, I estimate your home is worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $650,000, possibly more, if we stage it properly and time the listing right. The market in Eugene is hot right. Properties are moving fast, often within weeks of listing. $650,000. The number seemed abstract, impossible to reconcile with the physical reality of the house I had called home for 8 years. But abstract or not, it represented freedom. The freedom to start over, to build a new life without the constant weight of rejection and loneliness pressing down on my shoulders. What would be the process, I asked, if I wanted to move forward? Claudia outlined the steps: an official appraisal, any necessary repairs or improvement, staging, photography, listing. She estimated we could have the house on the market within 3 weeks if I was motivated. And I was motivated, more motivated than I had been about anything in years. "There's one more thing," I said, hesitating. "My wife doesn't know I'm doing this. I'm not trying to hide it from her exactly, but I need to handle the timing carefully. Is there a way to keep this quiet until I'm ready to tell her?" Claudia regarded me with that knowing gaze. "I can be discreet," she said, "but eventually she's going to find out. Open houses, showings, people coming in and out. It's not something you can hide forever." "I know," I said. "I just need a little time to get my affairs in order. Once the listing goes live, I'll tell her." She nodded slowly. "All right, Mr. Cole, let's get started." Over the next 3 weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I went to work as usual, interacting with colleagues and attending meetings as though nothing had changed. In the evenings, I came home to Priscilla and maintained the fiction of normalcy, eating dinner together in silence, watching television in separate corners of the living room, sleeping in the same bed while feeling a million miles apart. But in the stolen moments between, preparing for my departure, I met with Claudia several times, reviewing paperwork and making decisions about the sale. I consulted with a lawyer to ensure I was on solid legal ground. I began quietly sorting through my possessions, separating the things that were mine from the things that were ours, packing boxes that I stored in a rented storage unit across town. It was exhausting, maintaining this facade. Every day, I woke up with the weight of my secret pressing down on my chest. Every night, I lay awake wondering if I was making the right decision, if there was some other way I had not considered. But every time I looked at Priscilla, at her indifferent expression, her dismissive sighs, her absolute lack of interest in the man she had promised to love and cherish, I knew that I had no choice. The marriage was over. It had been over for years. I was simply the last one to accept it. The day the house was officially listed, I felt something shift inside me. It was not relief exactly, but something close to it. A sense that the wheels were finally in motion, that the interminable waiting was coming to an end. For better or worse, my life was about to change. Now I just had to tell my wife. I chose a Saturday morning to tell Priscilla. It seemed fitting somehow, a day when neither of us had work obligations, when there would be time for the conversation to unfold without the pressure of schedules and deadlines. I woke early that morning, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table watching the sunrise paint the walls in shades of gold. Priscilla came downstairs around 9, her hair disheveled and her eyes still heavy with sleep. She poured herself a cup of coffee without acknowledging my presence, then sat down across from me and began scrolling through her phone. "We need to talk," I said. She did not look up. "About what?" "About the house. About us. About what happens next." Something in my tone must have caught her attention because she finally set down her phone and met my gaze. "What do you mean? What happens next?" I took a deep breath. "I've listed the house for sale." The words hung in the air between us, stark and irreversible. I watched Priscilla's face cycle through a rapid series of emotion, confusion, disbelief, anger, before settling on something that looked almost like amusement. "Very funny," she said. "You almost had me for a second." "I'm not joking, Priscilla. The house is on the market. We already have 3 showings scheduled for this week." The amusement vanished, replaced by a dawning horror. "You can't be serious. You can't sell the house without my consent. I'm your wife. The house is in my name only," I said quietly. "I bought it before we were married. Legally, I don't need your consent." She stared at me as though I had grown a second head. But this is our home. We've lived here for 8 years. All our memories are here. You can't just—" "Our memories," I interrupted. "What memories, Priscilla? The memory of you turning away from me night after night? The memory of eating dinner in silence because we've run out of things to say to each other? The memory of feeling like a stranger in my own home?" Her face went pale. "Donovan, if this is about the intimacy thing—" "It's not just about intimacy," I said, cutting her off. "It's about connection. It's about feeling valued and wanted and seen. I've spent years trying to reach you, trying to understand what happened to us, trying to find some way to fix what's broken, and you've spent those same years pushing me away, dismissing my concerns, making me feel like an inconvenience for wanting a real marriage. That's not fair," she protested, her voice rising. "I've been going through a lot. The fertility treatments, the disappointments, the stress at work. You have no idea what I've been dealing with." "Because you won't tell me!" I exploded, my composure finally cracking. "I've asked you 1,000 times what's wrong, what I can do to help, and every time you shut me out. How am I supposed to support you through something you refuse to share with me?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. "It doesn't matter anymore. I've made my decision. Once the house sells, I'm leaving. I've already rented an apartment on the other side of town. I'll stay there until the sale goes through, and then I'll figure out my next steps." "You're leaving?" She said the words as though they were in a foreign language, something she could not quite parse. "You're actually leaving me?" "I'm removing myself from a situation that's been making me miserable for years. Whether you want to call that leaving you is up to you." Priscilla sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Then slowly, her expression hardened. "You're doing this to punish me, because I haven't been giving you enough sex. You're blowing up our entire life." I shook my head sadly. "You still don't get it. This isn't about punishment, and it's not just about sex. It's about the fact that I've been dying inside for years, and you haven't noticed. Or worse, you noticed and didn't care. Either way, I can't live like this anymore." "So what? You're just going to throw away 11 years of marriage? Everything we've built together? What have we built, Priscilla? A beautiful house that feels like a prison? A marriage that exists only on paper? I'm not throwing anything away. I'm acknowledging that there's nothing left to throw." She burst into tears then, ugly, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Part of me wanted to go to her, to comfort her the way I had done so many times, but I stayed where I was, watching her cry, feeling something inside me harden with each passing moment. "Please," she gasped between sobs. "Please don't do this. I'll change. I'll be better. You've made those promises before," I said quietly, "and nothing ever changes. I'm sorry, Priscilla. I truly am. But I can't keep waiting for a future that's never going to come." The days following my announcement were some of the most difficult. Priscilla oscillated wildly between rage and despair, sometimes within the span of a single conversation. She accused me of being selfish, of abandoning her, of never truly loving her in the first place. She threatened to fight the sale legally, to make my life a living hell, to tell everyone we knew what a monster I was. Then she would collapse into tears, begging me to reconsider, promising that things would be different if I would just give her one more chance. I listened to all of it, the accusations, the threats, the promises, and I felt strangely detached, as though I were watching the scene unfold from a great distance. Perhaps I had already done my grieving in private, during all those sleepless nights when I lay awake wondering where my marriage had gone wrong. Perhaps I had simply run out of emotional energy to invest in a relationship that had taken so much from me already. I moved into my rented apartment on a Wednesday afternoon, loading my car with boxes of clothes and personal items while Priscilla watched from the living room window. She did not come outside to say goodbye. She did not offer to help. She simply stood there, her face a mask of something I could not read, as I drove away from the home we had shared for years. The apartment was small but adequate. a one-bedroom unit on the third floor of a converted Victorian house. It smelled of fresh paint and cleaning products, the sterile scent of new beginnings. I unpacked my boxes methodically, finding places for my belongings in the unfamiliar space, trying to make it feel like somewhere I might actually live rather than just a temporary refuge. That first night alone, I sat on my second-hand couch and stared at the blank walls of new living room. The silence was different here, not the oppressive silence of a dying marriage, but something cleaner, more neutral. It was the silence of possibility, of a future that had not yet been written. My phone buzzed with a text message from Priscilla. "I can't believe you actually did this. I thought I knew you." I typed back, "Maybe you never really knew me at all." There was no response. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a new routine. I went to work each day, grateful for the distraction of projects and deadlines. I explored my new neighborhood, discovering coffee shops and restaurants I had never noticed during my years of marriage. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected, surprised to find how much I had missed their company, and I began, slowly and tentatively, to remember who I was. For years, I had defined myself primarily as Priscilla's husband. My identity had become so intertwined with our marriage that I had forgotten what it felt like to be simply Donovan, a man with his own interests, his own passions, his own dreams. Now, in the solitude of my small apartment, I had the opportunity to rediscover those parts of myself. I started running again, something I had given up years ago when Priscilla complained that it took too much time away from her. I joined a book club at the local library, reconnecting with my love of literature. I took up cooking, experimenting with recipes I had always wanted to try but had never felt inspired to make. Each new activity was a small act of reclamation, a way of taking back the parts of myself I had surrendered in the name of a marriage that had never truly nurtured me. And with each passing day, I felt lighter, freer, more like the man I had always wanted to be. But freedom, I was learning, came with its own complications. Because even as I rebuilt my life, the legal and financial realities of my situation demanded attention. The house had received multiple offers, and negotiations were underway. Priscilla had consulted a lawyer and was exploring her options, though she had grudgingly accepted that she had no legal claim to a property that had never been in her. We communicated primarily through text messages now, brief and businesslike exchanges about the sale and the division of our shared possessions. The emotional conversations had stopped. She had either accepted the reality of our situation or simply run out of energy to fight it. Either way, I was grateful for the respite. One evening, about 3 weeks after I moved out, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously, half expecting a telemarketer. "Mr. Cole, this is Claudia Vance. I have some news about the house." I straightened in my chair. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "We have a buyer. They've offered full asking price with a quick close, 30 days. If you're willing to accept, we can have this wrapped up by the end of next month." Full asking price. 30 days. The words felt surreal, like something from a dream. "I'm willing," I said. "Let's do it." "Excellent. I'll send over the paperwork tomorrow." "Congratulations, Mr. Cole. You're about to start a new chapter." A new chapter. As I hung up the phone, I realized that was exactly what this was. Not an ending, but a beginning. The old story was over, and a new one was waiting to be written. The call came 3 days before the closing. I was at work, reviewing blueprints for a new bridge project, when my phone buzzed with Priscilla's name. I considered ignoring it. Our communications had been so perfunctory lately that I could not imagine what she might have to say, but something made me answer. "Donovan." Her voice was different than I had heard it in months, stripped of the anger and defensiveness that had characterized our recent exchanges. "Can we talk? In person?" I hesitated. "About what?" "About everything. About us. About what went wrong." She paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since you left, a lot of soul-searching, and I realized some things that I need to share with you. Please, just give me an hour." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We arranged to meet that evening at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown where we had gone on some of our early dates, back when we were still two people falling in love rather than two strangers sharing a. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee she was not drinking. She looked different somehow, not physically, but in her bearing. The defensive rigidity that had characterized her for so long was gone, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. She looked, I realized with a start, like the woman I had married. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down across from her. "I know you didn't have." "I'm here," I said simply. "What did you want to say?" She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, staring down at the dark liquid held the answers she was searching for. "I've been seeing a therapist," she began, "since you left. I was so angry at first. At you, for giving up on us. At myself, for reasons I didn't fully understand. But the anger was exhausting, and it wasn't getting me anywhere, so I found someone to talk to." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. The therapist helped me see things I had been avoiding for years. Things about myself, about our marriage, about why I withdrew from you the way I did. She looked up, meeting my eyes. I owe you an explanation, Doc. Not to change your mind. I know it's too late for that, but because you deserve to understand what happened. I'm listening, I said. She took a deep breath. After the fertility treatments failed, something broke inside me. I felt like a failure as a woman, like my body had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. I know you tried to comfort me, tried to tell me it didn't matter, but I couldn't believe. How could it not matter? We had planned our whole future around having children, and suddenly that future was gone. I grieved too, I said quietly, but I never blamed you. I never thought of you as a failure. I know, she said, tears beginning to slip down her cheeks. But I blamed myself, and instead of letting you help me through it, I pushed you away. I thought if I could just keep you at a distance, if I could make myself not need you, then it wouldn't hurt as much when you inevitably left. When I inevitably left? I repeated, confused. I never gave you any indication I was going to. You didn't have to. I was convinced it was only a matter of time. What man wants to stay with a woman who can't give him children? What man wants to grow old with someone who's fundamentally broken? She laughed bitterly. The irony is, by trying to protect myself from you leaving, I guaranteed exactly that outcome. I sat with her words, feeling the weight of them settle over. All those years of rejection, of cold shoulders and dismissive sighs, they had not been about me at all. They had been about her own pain, her own fears, her desperate attempt to protect herself from a loss she believed was inevitable. Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked. Why did you let me believe you didn't want me anymore? Because I was ashamed, she whispered. Ashamed of my weakness, my fear, my inability to be the wife you deserved. It was easier to push you away than to admit how broken I was. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against mine. I'm so sorry, Donovan. I'm sorry for all the ways I hurt you. I'm sorry for the years we lost because I was too afraid to let you in. I looked at her hand on mine, at the familiar gold band that still circled her finger. Part of me wanted to take her hand, to tell her it was not too late, that we could still find our way back to each other. But another part of me, the part that had spent years being rejected and dismissed, knew that understanding was not the same as healing. The damage had been done, and no amount of explanation could. I appreciate you telling me this, I said finally. It helps me understand what happened, but understanding doesn't change where we are now. Her face crumpled. I know it's too late. I just needed you to know that it wasn't about you. It was never about you. We sat in silence for a long moment, two people who had once loved each other, now separated by years of pain and misunderstanding. Then I gently withdrew my hand and stood up. Take care of yourself, Priscilla. I hope you find the peace you're looking for. As I walked out of the cafe, I did not look back. The closing took place on a bright April morning at the offices of the title company downtown. Priscilla was not present. She had signed her portion of the necessary documents the day before, waiving any claim to the proceeds in exchange for a lump sum that we had negotiated through our lawyers. It was a fair arrangement, one that acknowledged her contributions to the household during our marriage, even though she had no legal claim to the property itself. I sat in a conference room with Claudia, signing document after document, while a title officer explained each one in meticulous detail. The new owners were a young couple, newlyweds who had fallen in love with the craftsman details and the wraparound porch. I found myself hoping they would be happier there than Priscilla and I, that the house would finally fulfill its potential as a home full of love and laughter. When the last document was signed and the wire transfer confirmed, Claudia shook my hand with a smile. Congratulations, Mr. Cole. It's official. Official. The word had a finality to it that I had not anticipated. For 8 years, that house had been the center of my life, the place I came home to each evening, the backdrop for holidays and gatherings and quiet Sunday mornings. Now it belonged to someone else, and I was left with nothing but the memories and a bank account significantly larger than it had been. I drove around aimlessly for a while after leaving the title company, not ready to return to my small apartment. I found myself pulled toward the waterfront, where the Willamette River wound its way through the city. I parked my car and walked along the path, watching joggers and cyclists pass by, families with strollers, couples holding hands. For so long, I had been one half of a couple. Now I was just one, a singular person navigating a world designed for pairs. The thought should have been depressing, but instead, I felt something unexpected. Possibility. For the first time in years, my future was entirely my own. I could go anywhere, do anything, become anyone. The constraints that had defined my life for so long had been removed, and the open expanse of possibility stretched out before me. I sat on a bench overlooking the river and watched the water flow past. The current never stopped, never hesitated. It simply kept moving forward, carrying whatever debris it encountered toward some distant destination. Perhaps that was the lesson I needed. Not to fight the current, not to cling to the banks, but to let myself be carried toward whatever came. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother Nathaniel, who lived in Portland. Heard the sail. How are you holding up? I typed back, better than expected, feeling strangely. His response came quickly. Come stay with me for a while. Take some time to figure out your next move. Sarah and the kids would love to have you. The offer was tempting. Nathaniel and I had always been close, and the thought of spending time with family, real, genuine connection, instead of the hollow imitation I had been living with, was appealing. But I was not ready to make any decisions just yet. For now, I simply wanted to sit with this moment, to feel the weight of what I had done, and the lightness of what lay ahead. I'll think about it, I replied. Thanks for the offer. As the sun began to set, painting the river in shades of orange and gold, I made myself a promise. Whatever came next, I would not let fear dictate my choices. I would not withdraw from connection the way Priscilla had, building walls to protect myself from imagined hurts. I would stay open, stay vulnerable, stay willing to take risks, even if they might end in pain, because the alternative, a life of safe, comfortable isolation, was no life at all. I took Nathaniel up on his offer, packing my meager belongings into my car and driving the 2 hours north to Portland. Sarah welcomed me with open arms and a home-cooked meal, and my niece and nephew, twin 8-year-olds named Oliver and Isabel, immediately claimed me as their new favorite playmate. For the first week, I did little but rest. The emotional exhaustion of the past few months had taken a greater toll than I had realized, and I found myself sleeping 10 or 11 hours a night, my body finally allowing itself the rest it had been denied. During the day, I helped Sarah with household tasks, played board games with the twins, and had long conversations with Nathaniel about everything and nothing. It was during one of these conversations that my brother asked the question I had been avoiding. What's your plan, Don? Not that we don't love having you here. You can't live in our guest room for... I smiled wryly. I know. I've been thinking about it. And I'm not sure. For so long, everything in my life was oriented around Priscilla, where we lived, what we did, how we spent our time. Now that she's gone, I feel like I'm starting from scratch. Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Starting from scratch means you can build whatever you want. What do I want, though? That's the question I keep coming back to. What did you want before Priscilla? He asked. Before you got so wrapped up in being a husband that you forgot how to be yourself? It was a good question, one that sent me digging through memories I had not visited in. Before Priscilla, I had been ambitious and adventurous, eager to make my mark on the world. I had talked about traveling, about seeing all the places I had only read about in books. I had dreamed of doing work that mattered, projects that would outlast me and contribute something meaningful to society. Somewhere along the way, those dreams had been set aside, not abandoned exactly, but deferred indefinitely in favor of the more immediate demands of marriage and daily life. Now, with no marriage and a daily life that was entirely of my own making, there was nothing stopping me from picking them back up. I used to want to travel, I said slowly, to see the world, experience different cultures, challenge myself in new environments. So do that, Nathaniel said simply. You have the money from the house sale. You don't have any obligations holding you. What's stopping you? What was stopping me? Fear, mostly. Fear of the unknown, of leaving the familiar behind, of venturing out into a world that felt increasingly uncertain. But fear, I was learning, was not a good reason to stay stuck. Fear was simply information, a signal that something important was at stake. What I did with that information was up to me. Nothing, I said finally. Nothing stopping me. Over the next few weeks, I began to plan. I researched destinations, considering everything from European cities to remote Asian villages. I looked into extended travel options, house-sitting, volunteer programs, slow travel opportunities that would allow me to really immerse myself in the places I visited, rather than just passing through as a tourist. The more I planned, the more excited For the first time in years, I had something to look forward to, a future that was not just about enduring or surviving, but about living fully, intentionally. I decided to start in Portugal. I had always been drawn to the country's combination of old-world charm and modern vitality, its beautiful coastline and vibrant cities. I found a month-long apartment rental in Lisbon and booked my flight for early June. When I told Nathaniel and Sarah about my plans, they were supportive if slightly incredulous. You're really doing this, Sarah said, shaking her head with a smile. A year ago, you were the most settled person I knew. Now you're running off to Europe like a 20-something backpacker. Maybe that 20-something was always in there somewhere, replied, just waiting for the chance to come out. The night before I left for the airport, I sat on Nathaniel's back porch with a glass of wine, looking up at the stars. In a few hours, I would be on a plane to a country I had never visited, beginning an adventure I could not. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. My phone buzzed with a final text from Priscilla. I heard you're leaving the country. I hope you find what you're looking for. I stared at the message for a long moment, considering how to respond. Finally, I typed, thank you. I hope you do too. Then I put my phone away and turned my attention back to the stars, ready to embrace whatever tomorrow might bring. Lisbon was everything I had hoped for and more. The city unfolded before me like a living painting. All terracotta rooftops and winding cobblestone streets, ancient trams rattling up impossibly steep hills. I spent my first week simply wandering, getting lost in the Alfama district's labyrinthine alleys, drinking coffee at sidewalk cafes while watching the city's rhythms play out around. My apartment was in the Barrio Alto, a fourth-floor walk-up with a tiny balcony that overlooked the river. Each morning, I would take my coffee out to that balcony and watch the sun rise over the Tagus, the water turning from gray to silver to gold as the day awakened. It was a small ritual, but it grounded me in a way I had not expected. A daily reminder that I was really here, really doing this, really living the life I had only dreamed about for so long. I fell into a routine of sorts, though nothing as rigid as the schedules I had kept back in Oregon. Mornings were for exploration, museums, churches, markets, whatever caught my attention. Afternoons were for writing. I had started keeping a journal, recording my thoughts and observations in a leather-bound notebook I had purchased at a shop near my apartment. Evenings were for food and wine, often enjoyed in the company of other travelers I met. It was at one of these dinners that I met Celeste. She was Portuguese-American, a graphic designer from Boston who had come to Lisbon to reconnect with her roots. We started talking over a shared plate of pastel de bacalhau at a restaurant in Baixa, and before I knew it, hours had passed and the staff was pointedly clearing tables around us. "I should let you get back to your evening," I said, suddenly aware of how long we had been talking. She smiled, a warm expression that crinkled the corners of her dark eyes. What if my evening was right here? It was forward, unexpected, and exactly what I needed to hear. We walked along the riverfront until well past midnight, talking about everything. Our pasts, our dreams, the strange and winding paths that had led us both to this city at this moment. She was easy to talk to in a way that felt unfamiliar after years of walking on eggshells around Priscilla. With Celeste, there were no hidden landmines, no topics that had to be carefully avoided. Just two people connecting over shared curiosity and a mutual appreciation for good conversation. "You're different than the other Americans I've met here," she said, as we stood on the waterfront, watching the lights of the city reflect off the dark water. "Most of them are running from something, but you seem like you're running towards something." I thought about her observation. I was running from something at first. A marriage that had stopped working, a life that had stopped feeling like mine, but somewhere along the way, the running changed. Now I'm not sure what I'm moving toward. I just know I want to keep moving. That's the best kind of journey. The ones where you don't know the destination until you arrive. We saw each other nearly every day for the rest of my time in Lisbon. There was no pressure, no expectation. Just the simple pleasure of two people enjoying each other's company. We explored the city together, took day trips to Sintra and Cascais, spent lazy afternoons in her apartment talking about our lives and the choices that had brought us to this point. On my last night in Lisbon, as we sat on my tiny balcony watching the sun set over the river, Celeste asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. "Do you regret it? Your marriage? All those years you spent with someone who couldn't appreciate you?" I considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain," I said finally. "I regret the years of feeling invisible, of wondering what was wrong with me, but I don't regret the marriage itself. It taught me things about myself I never would have learned otherwise, and it led me here, to this moment." She leaned over and kissed me, soft and sweet and full of possibility. Then maybe it was worth it after all. Maybe it was. I stayed in Europe for 3 months, traveling from Lisbon to Barcelona, from Barcelona to Rome, from Rome to a dozen small towns and villages whose names I can barely remember now. Each place taught me something new about myself and about the world, expanding my horizons in ways I could never have imagined during my years of quiet domesticity in Oregon. But eventually, the pull of home became too strong to it. Not home as in the house I had sold or the marriage I had left behind, but home in a broader sense. The place where my roots were, where the people I loved were waiting. Nathaniel and Sarah, with their warmth and their rambunctious twins. My parents, aging now but still sharp, still eager to know about my adventure. The land itself, the misty green hills of Oregon that I had known since childhood. I flew back into Portland on a gray September morning, the rain greeting me like an old friend. Nathaniel picked me up at the airport, and we spent the drive back to his house catching up on everything that had happened while I was away. "You look good," he observed. "Rested. Happy." "I am happy," I said, and realized with some surprise that it was true. Not the giddy, effervescent happiness of new love or great success, but something deeper and more sustainable. A quiet contentment with myself and my place in the world. "And the woman you mentioned in your emails, Celeste?" I smiled at the mention of her name. "We're keeping in touch. She's planning to visit next month. Beyond that, we're taking things as they come." "That doesn't sound like the old Donovan," Nathaniel said with a grin. "The old Donovan had his whole life planned out 5 years in advance." "The old Donovan was exhausting," I replied. The new Donovan is learning to embrace uncertainty. Over the next few weeks, I set about building my new life. I found an apartment in Portland, larger than my previous rental, with enough space to make it feel like a real home. I reconnected with old colleagues and began exploring job opportunities, eventually landing a position with a small engineering firm that specialized in sustainable infrastructure projects. It was different from my previous work, more aligned with the values I had developed during my time away, and I threw myself into it with an enthusiasm I had not felt in years. Celeste visited as promised, and we spent 2 weeks exploring the Pacific Northwest together. She fell in love with the region's natural beauty, the towering forests, the rugged coastline, the mountains that rose up from the landscape like ancient sentinels. By the time she left, we had made plans for me to visit her in Boston, and the outline of a possible future together had begun to take shape. But before that future could fully materialize, there was one piece of unfinished business I needed to address. I reached out to Priscilla and asked if we could meet. She agreed, and we arranged to have lunch at a restaurant downtown, neutral territory, far from the emotional minefield of our shared past. She looked good when she arrived, healthier than she had in years. The therapy was clearly working. There was a lightness about her that I had not seen since the early days of our relationship. "You look well," I said as we settled into our seats. "So do you," she replied. Europe agreed with you. We made small talk for a while, catching up on the superficial details of our respective lives. But eventually, the conversation turned to deeper matters. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened between us," Priscilla said, her fingers toying with the stem of her wine glass. "About everything I did wrong, everything I should have done differently. We both made mistakes," I said. "It wasn't all on you, maybe not. But I was the one who pushed you away, who made you feel unwanted in your own home. I have to own that." She met my eyes. "I'm sorry, Donovan, not just for the specific things I did, but for the person I became. I lost myself somewhere along the way, and I took you down with me. I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. The anger and resentment I had carried for so long had faded during my time away, replaced by a more compassionate understanding of the forces that had shaped our marriage. We were both struggling with things we didn't know how to express. The tragedy isn't that we hurt each other, it's that we didn't know how to stop. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm glad you found your way out. I'm glad one of us had the courage to say enough." "You're finding your way too," I said. "It just looks different than mine." We finished our lunch and parted with a hug, the first genuine physical contact we had shared in longer than I could remember. As I watched her walk away, I felt something shift inside me. The final threads connecting me to my old life had been cut, and I was truly free to move forward. The months that followed were some of the fullest of my life. My new job challenged me in ways I had not anticipated, pushing me to grow professionally while allowing me to contribute to projects I genuinely believed in. We designed green infrastructure for urban areas, stormwater management systems that mimicked natural processes, bridges and roads that minimized environmental impact. It was meaningful work, and I threw myself into it with a passion that surprised even me. Celeste and I continued our long-distance relationship, trading visits every few weeks and spending hours on video calls in between. It was not easy. The distance imposed limitations that sometimes felt unbearable, but it was also clarifying. We learned to communicate effectively, to express our needs and desires without the assumption that can build up when two people share a physical space. By the time she announced that she was considering relocating to Portland, we knew each other better than some couples who had been together for years. She moved in November, taking a position with a design firm downtown. We decided to live together almost immediately, not out of desperation or convenience, but out of a genuine desire to share our lives. The apartment I had rented was too small for 2 people, so we found a new place together. A sunny 2-bedroom in a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and enormous windows that flooded the space with light. Living with Celeste was nothing like living with Priscilla. Where my first marriage had been characterized by unspoken resentments and careful avoidance, this relationship was marked by openness and honesty. We talked about everything: our fears, our dreams, the small annoyances that inevitably arise when 2 people share a home. When conflicts occurred, we addressed them directly rather than letting them fester. It was healthier, more mature, more aligned with the kind of partnership I had always wanted. But it was not without its challenges. I carried scars from my first marriage, patterns of thinking and behaving that did not disappear simply because I was in a new relationship. Sometimes I would catch myself withdrawing emotionally, building walls out of old habit. Sometimes I would interpret innocent comments as criticism, my defenses rising before my rational mind could intervene. Celeste was patient with these moments, recognizing them for what they were, ghosts of a past I was still learning to. She would gently call me out when I retreated, remind me that she was not Priscilla, that the rules of our relationship were different, and slowly, painfully, I learned to trust again. One evening, about 6 months after Celeste moved in, We were cooking dinner together when she asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Have you ever thought about getting married again?" I set down the knife I had been using to chop vegetables and turned to face her. "I've thought about it," I admit. "I wasn't sure if you had." "I have," she said, her dark eyes meeting mine. "I'm not asking you to propose right now or anything. I just wanted to know if it was on the table." I considered the question carefully. The thought of marriage, of making those promises again, of binding myself to another person until death do us part, terrified me in ways I had not fully acknowledged. But the thought of losing Celeste, of watching this beautiful thing we had built slip away, terrified me. "It's on the table," I said finally, "when the time is right." She smiled, and in that smile I saw our future unfolding. Not a predetermined path, but a shared journey of discovery. Whatever came next, we would face it together. I proposed to Celeste on a rainy evening in March, almost exactly 2 years after I had moved out of the house I shared with Priscilla. We were at the same waterfront spot where I had sat on the day of the closing, watching the river flow past and contemplating the uncertain future. The symmetry felt appropriate somehow, a way of honoring the journey that had brought me from that moment of solitary reflection to this moment of shared hope. She said yes, of course. We had both known for months that this was where we were heading. The proposal was just a formalization of what our hearts had already decided. We married in October, in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Portland. Nathaniel was my best man, and the twins served as ring bearer and flower girl, taking their duties with the utmost seriousness. My parents were there, beaming with a pride that made my heart ache, and Celeste's family had flown in from Boston, embracing me as one of their own with a warmth that still amazed me. As I stood at the altar, watching Celeste walk toward me in her simple white dress, I thought about all the paths that had led to this moment, the failed fertility treatments, the years of loneliness, the desperate decision to sell my house and walk away from everything I knew. Each painful step had been necessary, each wrong turn had eventually led me right. When I said my vows, I spoke from a place of hard-won wisdom. "Celeste, I've been married before, and I know now what I didn't know then. Marriage isn't about perfection. It isn't about two people completing each other or fixing each other's broken parts. It's about choosing to walk through life together, with all the mess and uncertainty that entails. I choose you not because you make my life perfect, but because you make it worth living. I choose you not because I need you, but because I want you, today and every day, for as long as we both shall live." She was crying by the time I finished, and so was I. The officiant pronounced us married, and I kissed my wife, my second chance, with a joy I had thought was lost to me forever. At the reception, Nathaniel gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. He talked about the brother he had known growing up, the ambitious dreamer who had somewhere gotten lost along the way. He talked about watching me suffer through a marriage that was slowly killing me, wishing he could help but not knowing how. And he talked about the transformation he had witnessed over the past 2 years, the way I had reclaimed my life, my dreams, my capacity. "To Donovan and Celeste," he concluded, raising his glass, "may your journey together be filled with adventure, honesty, and the kind of love that only gets better with time." We danced until our feet ached and our cheeks hurt from smiling. And when the last guest had departed, and we were finally alone, Celeste and I stood on the vineyard's veranda, looking out at the moonlit hills rolling away into the distance. "Happy?" she asked, leaning her head against my shoulder. "Happier than I ever thought possible," I replied. And I meant every word. 5 years have passed since that moonlit night at the vineyard, and I am pleased to report that life has only gotten richer. Celeste and I have built something beautiful not a perfect life, because no such thing exists, but a good one. A life filled with love and laughter and the occasional argument that clears the air and reminds us that we are two separate people choosing to walk the same path. We bought a house last year, a craftsman's style that reminded me, painfully and sweetly, of the home I had sold all those years ago. But this house is different. This house is filled with the sounds of family. Our daughter Margot, who arrived 2 years after our wedding and has been the center of our universe ever since, and our son Theodore, who came along 18 months later and keeps us on our toes with his boundless energy. The children I thought I would never have are now the foundation of my days. I drop them off at daycare each morning, marveling at how quickly they are growing, how much personality they have already developed. Margot has her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn streak. Theodore is all sunshine and mischief, a reminder that life is meant to be enjoyed. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Priscilla, not with longing or regret, but with a kind of distant compassion. I heard through mutual friends that she remarried a few years ago, to a man she met through her therapist's book club of all things. They seem happy from what I can gather, and I am genuinely glad for her. The anger and hurt I carried for so long has faded into something softer, an acknowledgement of our shared history and a hope that she has found the peace she was seeking. She sent me a card when Margot was born, a simple congratulations without any of the emotional complexity that might have accompanied such a gesture in the years immediately following our divorce. I took it as a sign that she too that the wounds we had inflicted on each other had finally. I still think about that moment in the kitchen, when Priscilla offered me intimacy whenever I wanted, and I responded by deciding to sell our house. It seems like a lifetime ago now, something that happened to a different person in a different world. But I know it was me, and I know it was real, and I know it was necessary. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from something that is not working. Sometimes the path to happiness leads through pain and uncertainty, and the terrifying void of starting over. I did not know, when I made that phone call to Claudia Vance, that I was taking the first step toward the life I have now. I only knew that I could not stay where I was any longer. If you are reading this and you find yourself in a similar situation, trapped in a relationship that diminishes you, longing for a connection that seems permanently out of reach, I want you to know that there is another way. It will not be. It will require courage you may not know possess. But on the other side of that fear is a life you cannot yet imagine, full of possibilities you have not yet. I sold my house because I was tired of waiting for love that would never come. And in doing so, I found a love I had not known was possible. Sometimes the end is really just the beginning in disguise.